Hola, ¿cómo estás? Yo, guys, welcome back again today. Today we're going to be talking about the Mosquito Kingdom. The Mosquito Kingdom was a confederation of African-descended people and Amerindians, especially the Maya and Arawaka people. This kingdom was located on the coast of modern-day Honduras and Nicaragua. This kingdom was said to be broken down into multiple smaller states. Eventually, this kingdom would be made of two area masses that were in modern-day Honduras and Nicaragua. There were over 30 accounts by the Spanish of what the names of these two territories were. Many names were different, while some were duplicated by Spanish missionaries. It can't be said how long the kingdom existed before the arrival of the Spanish. In the 1500s, the Spanish would attempt many times to settle in the area. The Spanish authorities would create many licenses to conquer the area. They were never successful. The Spanish would then try to send in Catholic Spanish missionaries to convert locals. This approach would not work either. This would build resentment towards the Spanish Empire by the Mosquito Kingdom. A buccaneer by the initials of M.W. described the kingdom as having a king and military leaders. The Mosquito language, along with English, Creole, and some Spanish, was all spoken throughout the kingdom's existence. Before the wave of Africans on the coast during this time period, the Mosquito tradition states a king as early as 900 AD unified the local tribes. With British and Dutch privateer raids to Spanish ships, and the Spanish not being successful in the area, by 1630 the Providence Island Company of the British colonies of North America would move in. The company would set up peace talks on two small sandy islands, or cays, which pop out the ocean barely. For 10 years, from 1631 to 1641, the company would speak on regular basis with the kingdom to establish a relationship. The Providence Island Company would take and pay for the king's son to visit Charles I in England. While his son was gone, the Mosquito King died, and while his son was in England and on his return to the kingdom, he would agree to put the kingdom under the English's Protectorate. With this decision, over time, Christian and English last names would pop up in the kingdom. A British cemetery still exists there as well. In 1641, the Spanish would take the Providence Island with no English base within the area. In 1655, the British would capture Jamaica. A slave ship coming from the Caribbeans would be overthrown by Africans and then shipwrecked on the coast. These Africans would settle in the Mosquito Kingdom. Some Africans would marry each others, while others would marry Mosquito peoples. The Mosquito Sambo group would eventually rule over the northern portion of the Mosquito Kingdom as military generals in the late 1600s. Eventually, the Mosquito Sambo Africans would become royalty and rule over the kingdom. In the 1700s, the kingdom would raid tribes not part of the kingdom and Spanish territories. The kingdom would raid as far south as modern-day Costa Rica. The kingdom would sell captives of war to the British and their merchants. Many captives were taken into slavery back into Jamaica. The kingdom, over time, was a ever-moving and gapped kingdom. Kings had power over many things, but did not always have final say in the kingdom's court. The king's home would be near Sandy Bay, as well as the generals. The governor would control the southern part of the kingdom and was from a Amerindian group from the area. Eventually in the 1700s, a fourth title, king, general, governor, and admiral would be added, admiral being the fourth title. The admiral was also from a Amerindian group and controlled the far south from Bluefields to Pearl Key Lagoon. In 1740, the Mesquite king, Edward I, would sign a treaty of friendship and alliance with the British. The Mosquito Kingdom would give parts of its lands to the British. A superintendent of the shore, Robert Hodgson, would be appointed. It is believed that the British did this to secure help for the War of Jenkins' Ear. In this war, the Mosquito Kingdom and the British would attack Spanish settlements. The British and the Mosquito Kingdom would take Spanish forts and plunder rich cacao areas. Cacao is where chocolate comes from, for anyone that does not know. This would give British protection over its interests in the kingdom, as well as with its investments next door in British Honduras holdings, which is now modern-day Belize. The British also infiltrated the kingdom by this relationship. The British would ask Edward I to establish plantations and settlements in the Mosquito Kingdom. This was granted in 1742, and the British would import slaves to cut down timber and to work the fields for crops. The Mosquito Kingdom and British also used Amerindian slaves captured in Spanish territories. The British would gift the kingdom with goods and weapons to hold down slave revolts and recapture runaway slaves. Spain was not done with the area yet, and during the American Revolutionary War, the Spanish would try to take back its territories in the area. The Spanish would try to eliminate the British once and for all. They did not take back some of their settlements, but eventually Irish settlers would retake the area. After the American Revolutionary War, the British would talk to Spain and try to make diplomatic progress. In 1786, in the Convention of London, the British would agree with Spain to move its slaves and settlers to what would become British Honduras. The British would give up its land rights going to the Spanish. The Mosquito Kingdom elites would divide on the kingdom's alliance. In the north, the more Sambo African royalty elite Mesquites wanted to stay with the British, while the south ran Amerindian admiral would want to side with the Spanish. Both sides would visit viceroys of different parts of both countries of modern-day Honduras and Nicaragua. One viceroy, Francisco Gil, suggests the kingdom be ran by Havana in Cuba due to its similarities with British Jamaica. This was due to the kingdom already having a connection with British Jamaica and Cuba being right next to Jamaica. The Spanish crown would deny this from Spain, and it did not happen. Many South American countries at the time were governed by a viceroy of European descent or mostly European descent. To the south, Bluefields was even appointed to be ruled by a Spanish viceroy. In fact, the viceroy was not actually Spanish, but former Englishman Robert Hodgson. Working under the Spanish Empire now, this choice was set in motion for a reason. This reason was because Robert had already been the coast supervisor when the British owned part of the Mosquito Kingdom. The Spanish thought the kingdom would respond well with him. The Spanish thought the kingdom would respond better with him. Eventually, his son would take his position under the Spanish Empire. The Spanish also tried to give gifts to the Mosquito elites and give them education in Guatemala. Catholic missionaries, once again, tried to convert the population to the Christian religion. This was very hard due to King George Frederick II being still loyal to the British and the southern part of the Mosquito Kingdom leaning towards the Spanish. The southern part would even start to adopt Spanish names. The Spanish would even try to re-Spanish the area by importing Spanish people from the Caribbeans to the area. This would not work due to many reasons. One reason, the kingdom was not satisfied with the gifts from Spain. Another reason, Spanish settlers would get ill and die on the way to the southern part of the kingdom. A third reason, the northern part of the kingdom would kill Hutchison's son in the south and push the Spanish out of the kingdom. In 1801, the king of the Mosquito Kingdom would die. No one knows how he died, but there is speculation he was poisoned by a family member for a deal with the Spanish. His brother, Stephen, would try to take control of the kingdom and become king. A general in the kingdom, General Robinson, would send the former king's son to Jamaica. He did this so the former king's brother would not kill or take power from the young man. In Jamaica, the former king's son, George Frederick Augustus I, would control a region of the island. For the next 14 years, the Spanish would leave the coast. Viceroys from different territories at the time, like New Granada and Guatemala, would try to control the coast of the Mosquito Kingdom. Guatemala's viceroy at the time could have took an army to the area, but second-guessed the situation. If the viceroy would have, it is said no one would have questioned him moving in after Spain. Also, the coast of the kingdom would have blended in as a territory when Spain moved back in. The coast would soon become very English, with the British moving back in. In 1806, the British would occupy the area. For the next couple of years, disputes between the United Provinces of Central America and Gran Colombia after the Latin American independence would arise. In 1815, Stephen would make himself king of the Mosquito Kingdom. Spain would recognize him as a king and started to send him gifts. 33 nobles of the Mosquito Kingdom did not agree and only saw the former king's son as the real king. George Frederick Augustus I would be sent for and brought back to Belize from Jamaica. Once in Belize, in 1816, he would be crowned king by the nobles. This would bring back British support to the kingdom. This would be a bad time for Spain as they lost New Granada in 1819. The Spanish Empire would also lose most of Central America in 1821 during the independence of Central American countries. One example was the First Mexican Empire. The kingdom would establish British ties, while the British merged with Ireland to form the United Kingdom in 1801. The kingdom would also let foreigners settle in the kingdom's lands. If the settlers respected the kingdom, they could settle there. Many Garifuna people from Honduras and British would take lands in the kingdom. Many people also were scammed by Europeans who sold lands to whites back in Europe, promising the land was developed already. Once the Europeans would arrive from Europe, the lands needed more than just workers, but a variety of areas that had to be developed, anywhere from forest to wildlands. The tropical temperature and diseases also plagued Europeans, even killing some of them. In 1845, Robert Charles Frederick would replace the king of the Mosquito Empire. He would appoint Europeans and citizens of the kingdoms to collect taxes and tribute from the kingdom as far down as modern-day Panama. The kingdom would also find income from the neighboring Belize, whose mahogany wood was getting low. The kingdom would ramp up selling wood to Europeans and to Belize. In 1837, the British would recognize the Mosquito Kingdom as an independent state. This was due to independent Central American countries breaking away from their European colonizers. The British did not want the kingdom absorbed as it was influential. The kingdom would expand economically, and many people from the Caribbean, China, America, and Europe would move to the kingdom. The kingdom also benefited from the English-speaking Caribbeans coming into the kingdom. Many American companies would hire them due to them already knowing English. This would also make the kingdom more fruitful. The Mesquite king would go to Nicaragua in 1841 on a British ship. It appears this was an action on behalf of the king and an independent British ship without the permission of the British government. This trip would be to take over the Caribbean port of San Juan del Norte. With Belize still being governed by the British at this time, this was an attempt to make the port part of the Mosquito Kingdom. Both parties would take the commander of the port and abandon the commander on a desert island beach. The population of the port was told to leave, but this never happened due to Nicaragua government protesting to the British. The British government back in Europe never went through with the clearing out of the people at the port, but also did not punish the British ship and generals for this event. The British, in 1844, would soon declare once more the Mosquito Kingdom a protectorate of the United Kingdom. A new British general would be in control of the kingdom's coast. When Robert Charles Frederick, the king of the Mosquito Kingdom, died, his successor, George Augustus Frederick II, would take power. Before this takeover, the kingdom had inner fighting to some level. The British wanted to build a canal before the United States did, and the British was worrying about American power and influence in Central America. In 1848, Nicaragua would protest against the expansion of the kingdom. The new king would give them the option to leave before January 1st. Nicaragua would ask for the United States' help, but the U.S. was busy fighting the Mexican Empire at the time and did not respond. The kingdom and the British would send in parts of their army and 2 British warships to seize San Juan del Norte. With some deaths and British prisoners being freed after the second attempt to take San Juan, Nicaragua would sign a peace treaty with the kingdom. This area would be renamed Greytown. After the Mexican-American War, the USA and the British would argue over countries in Central America. Eventually, to avoid war once more, the British and Americans would agree not to occupy or colonize any Central American countries. The British stated that they believed that in this agreement, they could not take any new lands, but could keep the Mosquito Coast, arguing that the 1844 Protectorate and 1848 peace treaties were still valid. The United States assumed the British would give up the coast. Soon after, the American steamship called Prometheus was attacked by a British warship. This was due to the American ship not paying port tariffs at Greytown. One of the richest men in the United States at the time was on the ship. Cornelius Vanderbilt would be one of the reasons the British would apologize to the United States. The U.S. would then send armed regiments to the area. From 1852 to 1859, many back and forth incidents, events, apologies, and other occasions would happen between the two nations in Central America. In 1860, the common British citizen did not think the nation needed to have presence on the coast anymore. The British government would return many islands, the northern part of the Mosquito Kingdom coast to Honduras, sign the Treaty of Maragu, eventually giving the rest of the kingdom's coast to Nicaragua, and negotiation talks with Guatemala to make the British territory bigger in Belize. From 1840 to 1890, Germans would come to the kingdom. Originally, Prince Charles of Prussia wanted to settle the area, but eventually Prince Schonberg would suggest converting the population slowly to the Christian religion. Over 4,000 Mesquite and other indigenous tribe members would join in 50 years. In between this time, in the 1860s, the Mosquito Kingdom would be reduced to territory around Bluefields. The British would also sign a treaty to Nicaragua to get many territories as well. The kingdom would further decline in 1860, which saw a treaty recognize the kingdom reduced, the king being a chief now and not a king, the kingdom's hierarchy abolished, the former king being no more than a member of a council of 41 members that made final decisions, and most of those members not being Mosquito, but missionaries from Europe. The king would also be paid 1,000 British pounds till 1870 by the Nicaraguan government. In 1865, King Augustic Frederick II would die. With his death, it was argued by the council that none of his wives were Mosquito by lineage, and none of their children were full-blooded Sambo African or Amerindian. Eventually, the former king's nephew, William Henry Clarence, was recognized by the council as the new chief. The Nicaraguan government did not agree or recognize this. William would go to the British for support to make sure Nicaragua abided by the 1860 treaty. William's argument was that Nicaragua's political landscape was not stable and immigrants from the country were moving towards the Mosquito Kingdom's territory. The British in Nicaragua would agree to let the Emperor of Austria make the decision. Emperor Francis Joseph I would decide in 1861 that the Mosquito Kingdom was right in their demands, but a meet-in-the-middle approach would make the disagreement easier and fair. The emperor's suggested terms, such as the Mosquito Kingdom combining their flag with the Nicaraguan kingdom. While Nicaragua would not touch natural resources in the kingdom, and export and imports could not be disturbed nor taxed by Nicaragua. United States citizens would eventually start to move into the settlement kingdom. Over time, the Mosquito Kingdom would protest against more and more American presence in the reserve. Once more asking the British for help, there would be no help this time. United States troops would start to occupy Bluefield. The U.S. government stated it was doing so to protect U.S. interests and citizens. After 14 years, on November 20th, 1894, the kingdom would be incorporated in the Republic of Nicaragua by Jose Santos. Jose was the president of Nicaragua at the time. So yo guys, please like, turn on the bell notification so you get all my videos, subscribe as well. Add me on all social medias, which is Afric Network, which is Instagram, Twitter, SoundCloud, Snapchat, Facebook, and TikTok. Each one teach one. Always love each other, always learn from each other. And yo guys, until next time, peace, one love.